When I was 27 years old, I had uncontrolled anxiety. This led me down a very dangerous path that literally nearly killed me. I want to share my story with you about how I overcame my anxiety and my road to mental and physical recovery. Although I haven't talked about it much on this channel, pretty much everyone in my personal life knows that I have dealt with serious heart conditions for the last 6 years. But what even those people don't know is that it all started with my anxiety. In 2012, I was feeling a bit lost in life. I had no long-term ambition, mostly because I was paralyzed by fear, even though you would never get me to admit it back then. I was working a job that I really had hit a ceiling at. I'd just gone through a difficult breakup, and I was kind of just drifting through life. My fear and anxiety of changing things in my life or trying new things or taking risks was paralyzing to me. Anxiety has the ability to manifest itself in so many different physical ways: headaches, nausea, blurred vision, jitters, stomach aches, body cramps. And at the time, I was also training like a full-time athlete. And this overtraining, this additional physical stress that was being placed in my body did not help the situation. And looking back now, it would be almost impossible for me to have discerned the difference between the two. So in 2012, with my undiagnosed anxiety and the physical stress I was putting my body through, I spent most of my nights laying awake, staring at the ceiling, dealing with muscle spasms and cramps, heart palpitations, and generally ruminating thoughts. So naturally, I just did what anybody else would do. People joke that when you go onto a site like WebMD, no matter what your symptoms are, it always comes back as something serious like brain cancer. But with the laundry list of symptoms that I had, I was seeing things like Parkinson's disease, MS, ALS, brain tumors. And when you are anxious, you don't look at the most logical answer, which was also anxiety listed right there in front of me, and you just jump to the worst possible conclusions. I had at least enough common sense to book a doctor's appointment because I was starting to seriously worry that I was developing a serious neurological condition. And when you are a young, healthy athlete, that's like your worst possible nightmare. My doctor was great, but if he was nothing else, he was certainly thorough. Looking back, I can only imagine how difficult it must be to have a young, healthy person come into your office and just have this shotgun scatter of different symptoms, none of which are really related. So he ordered just about every test you could get at a primary care's office, and that included an EKG, which looks at the rhythm of your heart. And that's when my entire life changed. My EKG came back as abnormal. I had an arrhythmia, and my doctor assured me that it probably didn't have anything to do with the other symptoms I was experiencing, but he did want me to see a specialist. Anxiety is funny because now that I had an actual name to put towards my failing health that I believed I had, all my other symptoms disappeared. All I could think about from then on out was WPW and my heart. I read every single piece of information I could find on WPW. And again, my anxiety forced me to ignore all of the information that, hey, this condition's usually fairly benign and many people live with it and it's not a big deal and the risk of serious injury or death is very low. But I could not rationalize that way. All I could see was, hey, there's a potential that you could have a heart attack from this particular condition. When it came time to meet with the specialist, he assured me that I should just get the procedure to fix the arrhythmia done, which was called an ablation. In the world of cardiology and electrophysiology, this procedure is actually fairly standard and commonplace, and the risks are relatively low. It certainly didn't help that many of the nurses told me that this particular doctor was a genius, and some people around the hospital regarded him almost as a god. With that in mind, I actually just took his information at face value and took it as gospel, and I decided to move ahead with the ablation procedure. The procedure, the ablation, ultimately ended up being unnecessary. And it ultimately also changed my life. Not for the best. Unbeknownst to me at the time, and there is some debate whether or not the doctor knew this, but the natural rhythm of my heart was damaged that day that I had the ablation done. And over the next few years, my heart rate began to slowly decrease over time. Over the next 3 years, I would feel tired, dizzy, short of breath. I had a hard time maintaining stamina while I exercised. I was gaining weight like crazy. And then the almost near fainting spells started. So one day I decided I need to go to the ER. Something's not right. And I have a resting heart rate of 27 beats per minute. And naturally, they admit me right away. After a very confusing week spent in the hospital, it was determined that I did in fact need a pacemaker, and I had one implanted. Although I didn't want one, and I felt like it was going to really affect my quality of life, there really wasn't another option. And I did feel immediately better after having it put in. My heart rate was back to normal. I felt so much more energized. I started to easily lose weight. People who didn't even really know what was going on with me would comment that my cheeks had color in them again, and it just made a big difference in my life. But after a short while, I started to develop new symptoms. I would almost pass out after standing up from a seated position, and I felt like I just had no ability to go. Like if I needed to run or quickly go up a set of stairs, I just couldn't pull the trigger. I could tell something just wasn't right. So I went back to the doctor and they did some tests, and they found that although my heart was beating fast enough, it wasn't pumping enough blood with each beat. So my heart's function had decreased, and this is known as heart failure. And at 31 years old, having been a lifelong athlete, I essentially had the heart function of a 90-year-old. The next year was easily one of the most difficult years of my life. I was trying to run my business. I was trying to figure out what was going on with my heart. The doctors weren't sure why my heart function was down. I was regularly going for different tests. A lot of my free time was spent on the phone with the insurance company, arguing with them because they didn't want to pay for these tests that a normally senior citizen would be getting, or tests for really rare diseases like sarcoidosis, or genetic testing for diseases that don't even have names yet. It really seemed like the doctors were taking shots in the dark. And I remember towards the end of the year, there was a big gap between conversations with my doctor, and I was calling him, trying to get a hold of him. And when I finally got a hold of him, he basically said, "I'm sorry I haven't gotten back to you. It's because I have nothing to tell you. I don't know what to do. I've researched, I can't figure this out. I'm going to refer you to a specialist in Boston." And if you're in New England, Boston is considered kind of the mecca for medicine. That's all the best hospitals are down there. All the best doctors are down there. So I went to Boston, and I remember I saw a specialist there, and he looked at my chart, took one look at it, and said, "They put the wrong kind of pacemaker in you." Without getting too deep into the physics of everything, essentially there's a few different types of pacemakers, and for my particular heart condition, the damage that was done to my heart with that initial ablation procedure, I needed a 3-lead pacemaker, and I only had a 2-lead pacemaker. So it was actually causing further damage to my heart. And while it was making my heart beat fast enough, it was weakening the heart as a muscle. So of course, the natural solution was to put the new kind of pacemaker in me. But the only problem was that while the doctors knew the right type of pacemaker wouldn't cause any further damage, they were unsure if my heart was going to be able to recover from the damage that had already been done. And that is when terms like heart transplant started to get thrown around. And as a young person, healthy most of their life, running a business, that is one of the scariest things you can hear. So we went ahead with the surgery to put the new pacemaker in, but it wasn't the type of thing where they put it in and instantly you're going to be better. We didn't know if it was going to reverse the damage or not until it had been in me for a while. So we scheduled a follow-up series of tests for about 3 months out. And those 3 months were very challenging because my anxiety was just completely unbridled at that point. I had a completely negative attitude about my health, about my chances of recovering from all this damage that had been done. I felt like I had been kind of screwed over by the system. I felt like I'd been cheated out of some really good years of my life. And I know that anyone that's had a heart transplant, they don't have it easy once they have one. So I was thinking, this isn't going to work. I'm going to need a heart transplant. I'm going to have to be on medication, immunosuppressants for the rest of my life so my body doesn't reject the organ. And it seemed like I wasn't getting better. Like I was still getting dizzy spells. I was still getting short of breath. It just seemed like nothing was going right. And I suffered through that mentality for about 3 months. And I remember going to the doctor to get the echocardiogram done. And basically it's an ultrasound on your heart. And I remember the tech doing the procedure, and she was rubbing the ultrasound on my chest, and I'm constantly reading her face. What does she see? Does she look concerned? Does this seem routine? Is she trying to hide something from me so I don't get worried? I had the test done. Okay, we'll contact you when we have the results. And maybe 2 days later, I just remember feeling a buzz in my pocket, pulling my phone out, seeing I had a notification from the hospital, opening the portal to my medical records, and there it was. Normal heart function. My heart had almost completely recovered from the damage done by the first pacemaker. And it was just like a weight being lifted off of my shoulders. I just felt completely light as a feather. I remember being so happy I couldn't stop smiling, and I had to go to work shortly after that, and people were saying, "Oh, geez, you're so happy. What's going on? You look so delighted. Did something happen? Did you get some good news?" And I could barely hold it together that day. I felt like I was going to cry most of the day because I just felt so good. And the next day, this thought occurred to me that, well, wait a minute. If your heart function was getting better, how come you were still having dizzy spells and shortness of breath and waking up in the middle of the night gasping for air? That's another symptom of heart failure. Why was that happening after the new pacemaker went in? And that's when I realized that even though physically I had gotten better, mentally I was still letting my anxiety take control of my life. And that even though I had experienced these very, very real symptoms due to my heart condition, after the heart condition was remedied, I was still experiencing symptoms, but they were coming from up here. And that was a very big pivoting moment in my life and in my battle with anxiety, because I realized that our minds are so powerful that they can play tricks on us. And I wasn't going to let my mind do that anymore. So I came up with a mantra for myself. Anytime I feel anxious, I feel like the world's crumbling down around me, anytime that I am freaking out about something inside, I just repeat to myself, anxiety, I do not believe you. It's like having the angel and the devil on your shoulder, where one voice is saying, you're screwed, this is it, your life's over, this terrible thing's going to happen, or whatever. And on the other side, you have some logic, and the anxiety is the devil. And I just choose to ignore that voice that's inside of my head that I think a lot of people have, right? You have these ruminating thoughts and you can't let go of a certain idea, and it just kind of stabs at you over and over again. I think that having gone through these real problems, these real physical issues with my heart, it made me realize that there are real problems and then there are imagined problems. So I do have a leg up in that sense because I can differentiate the two. But also anybody can kind of use this technique to help them deal with their anxiety. So very simply, just look back at your life, some of the most anxious times of your life when you were freaking out on the inside, and think about all the terrible things you thought were going to happen. And you're still here. You made it. You survived. You made it out alive. When you realize that you made it out alive, the next time you feel that way, you can think back to those previous moments and you go, you know what? It wasn't as bad as I thought it was. I have control. I am going to be okay. I'm going to be safe. That's what has worked for me more than anything. And I've been clinically diagnosed with anxiety by 2 different doctors. And I've been very fortunate that I've been able to avoid using pharmaceutical interventions. And there's nothing wrong with pharmaceutical interventions. They're very helpful for many people. But I was able to find another solution for myself, and that has been life-changing. Now, don't get me wrong, I still feel anxious sometimes. I don't think it's the type of thing that you can ever completely get rid of. And I think even people who don't necessarily have clinical anxiety do feel anxious from time to time. That's a normal part of the human experience. The important part is that you don't let it control your life. The important part is that you don't let it trick you into thinking that your world's going to end or everyone's out to get you, or just assuming the worst about people or certain situations. So while this method of kind of repeating this mantra and just choosing not to believe that voice in your head may not work for everyone, it's certainly worked for me. And if this concept even helps one other person, I'll feel like my job has been done. So if you're watching this and you struggle with anxiety, please know you're not alone, and there is help out there, and there are a lot of great strategies to help you deal with it. I'm Anthony on Life, and you will see me in the next video.